Welcome everybody, thanks for tuning into the LoamWolf.com. My name is Drew and today we're going to be reviewing the Maxxis Minion DHR II. I've also got a DHF here for reference. We're going to be talking a bit about both and the performance, some similarities and differences in the two. So we're also going to dispel any rumors or questions you might have about what the F and R stand for. We still maintain it stands for fun and rowdy, but we'll get to that at the end of the video. So we've been testing the DHR II in a couple of different sizes. Primarily, we've been spending a lot of time in the 29 by 2.4 size on our new Canyon sender. And it was kind of one of the first times in recent memory where we got to ride this tire on the front and the back. And normally, obviously, like most people, we would run the DHF on the front and the DHR II on the rear. But we were really excited to try this DHR II on the front and just see what the differences were once we got out on the trail. So I'm going to open this tire up here. We can try to take a look at the profile. There are some definite similarities when you look at the DHR and a lot of differences as well. So as you look at this tire, it's going to be rolling towards me, so you'll be looking at it as if you were on the bike looking down at your tire. Now, the similarities are in the shoulder knobs, and they are nearly identical. Well, they are identical to the DHF. They're just larger and more supported. And that's going to mean that they won't squirm, they won't fold quite as much. They'll be just a little bit more supported and could offer you a little bit of enhanced performance depending on the conditions. Now, obviously, some of the other differences start to become more apparent once you look at the center of the tire, where the DHF and the DHR are quite a bit different. So the DHF, which is going to be on the viewer's left, has got an alternating 2-block pattern. And the rows of knobs are pretty aggressively ramped and are siped and cut in the middle to allow for some conformity and enhanced traction on the terrain. So the center knob pattern on the DHR II is an alternating pattern as well, but it goes from a solid center block to 2 separate blocks to another like 2 1/3 blocks that are, it's like 2 tall blocks with a little bridge in the center. Now there's a lot more siping on the center knobs on the DHR. There's a very aggressive braking shelf, obviously being that it was designed primarily as a rear tire. A lot of the braking power and performance is going to be coming from those brakes, from those braking edges. You still have a pretty solid ramp, however, at the front to give you some solid rolling speed. But if you notice the spacing of the knobs from the DHR and the DHF, there's a very big difference. And that difference means a very big change in cornering traction. If you've ridden or read many reviews on the DHF, you'll know that there's that little bit of a float zone, as they call it. And essentially what that is as you're leaning that tire over, when it's kind of curved out like this, you'll notice there's a little bit of a float zone between those center knobs and those shoulder knobs. And as you're either setting up for a corner, or maybe it's not a real sharp radius turn and you're just kind of in that in-between zone where you're not fully engaged on the shoulder knobs, but not fully on the center knobs, you can get a little bit of a vague feel. And it's not until you really get that tire over onto the shoulder knobs and you get that bite that you really enjoy the benefit of the DHF. So the DHR, since the knobs are tighter spaced and there's less of a channel along that shoulder there between the center knob and the shoulder, you get a more predictable and a more constant feel of grip and traction as you're entering corners. So what we noticed is that different types of riders and different types of terrain conditions will make dedicated fans for either tire. Guys like Danny Hart, Troy Brosnan love running a DHR II on the front and rear, while another number of guys will run a DHF in the front or maybe a DHF in the rear as well. And it really depends on their style and the terrain that they like to ride. Being that the DHR II has got more consistent knobs all the way across, you're going to have a more even feel of grip all the way over to the side from the centers. In my opinion, the downside to that is you also don't quite get like that just ground piercing bite that you get on that DHF in softer, loamier terrains when you push past that float zone and really dip the bars over and get into those shoulder knobs. That kind of gives a little bit of an advantage to the DHF when you get in some softer soil. We talked with Maxxis a little bit on our feedback, what they thought about the tires, their years of testing, athlete and rider feedback, and they would give the nod on loose over hard pack and hard pack terrain to the DHR II. We think we're probably on the same boat as them because these knobs are a little bit wider and a little more supportive. And although initially we thought that tight packed pattern would cause them to float up on top of that marbly terrain, the more supportive knobs actually don't fold, squirm, or roll as much on those kind of loose ball bearings and rocks like the DHF does a little bit. So, with that, you're kind of having to fight the knobs squirming and folding as well as the terrain beneath you moving. And with the DHR, you get, at least the knobs are still, so you just got to deal with the rocks and pebbles moving. In terms of bite in general, all around conditions, the DHR is a really solid option. We just got done doing like 12 days of bike park riding with the DHR front and rear on a couple of different bikes. And we rode a lot of very loose, very rocky, dry, dusty conditions, lots of tree roots, and we're super impressed with how it did. Again, when you get into some of that softer, nicer soil or some wet stuff, that DHF in the front is probably going to be our go-to choice. And ultimately, I think both tires have an application and a rider that they suit best. So if you're an aggressive guy, you like getting the bike over, you've got the conditions where you're not, having to do these like in-between turn kind of corners where you're not fully able to get the bike over, that DHF is definitely going to be a solid option. Just know that, if you've never ridden one before, are there people still out there who haven't ridden a DHF? That there is that little float zone, that little bit of vagueness until you really get it over into that shoulder knob, and your confidence will be rewarded. If you've got a lot of loose over hard, you've got a lot of corners and terrain that aren't really sharp and require you to get that bike over quite as far, if you're just maybe a little bit on the timid side, you don't want to have that weird vague feeling, don't give up on the Minion yet. Try the Minion DHR II up front because it will take away that kind of vagueness that you felt. It'll still give you a lot of braking power, it'll still roll pretty quickly, and it might be a really good option for you in a lot of loose, dry, and dusty conditions. So there you have it, folks. That is our impression of the DHR II in comparison to the DHF as a front tire. We did talk with Maxxis at length, asked them a lot of questions, one of which was, does R stand for rear and F stand for front? And they said, yes, it does. So there you have it. No more rumors, no more guessing. Maxxis said it. F is for front, R is for rear. But they also said your bike won't explode if you put an F on the back and an R on the front. So feel free to experiment, have fun, ride the tires. They offer some very different performance and feel, and it could be something that surprises you and replaces your old trusty DHF with a DHR front and rear. Another benefit of that is when you wear out your DHR in the back, you can just bump it to the rear and just get a fresh front, and you get twice the mileage out of one tire. Nothing wrong with that, right? So thank you guys for watching. Hope you enjoyed, and we'll see you out on the trails.